We acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to elders and their descendants who continue in a long tradition of cultural and spiritual connection to country since time immemorial. We acknowledge the First Peoples and their continuing custodianship of the lands on which we work and live. We recognise their struggle and honour their contributions to current and future generations. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to the Reconnection Revolution. I'm your host, Celeste Halliday. In a world that often encourages us to play safe and stay small, we go deep and explore the big questions, the daily joys and chaos of life, and everything in between. Our goal? To help you find your spark if you feel like it's been dimmed, and ignite you if you're ready to create a reconnection revolution in your own life. Wherever you're at right now, I'm so glad that you're here with us. I'm so excited to share this episode with Dr. Christy Goodwin with you. It comes hot on the heels of a weekend having those tough conversations with my teenage children about how we use technology, screen time, the humans in the house as opposed to the machines that they're wanting to look at all the time. And Dr. Christy shares some really great practical ways to get in charge of the relationship we have with technology, but also we have a great conversation about how we're role modelling really bad stuff to our kids and then blaming them for it. So if you want to change the relationship your kids have with technology, the way it's used in your home and the way you're using it yourself, you want to listen right to the end because there is gold in this episode. Lovely to have you with us today.
It is great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we had a quick chat just before we came on with everybody else talking about how aligned the work we're doing in the world is. Mine is very much about that broader picture of connection and disconnection. We're in the middle of a loneliness epidemic. We know it's one of the biggest social issues in the world, let alone one of the biggest health issues in the world. And one of the big drivers of that is the rise of handheld digital devices, which are keeping us sucked in to digital online world instead of connected in the real world. And I think it gets a bad rap too, because in some ways tech is incredibly connecting, but it's about how we use it as a force for good, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And I think what you've just described is what I refer to as the digital dilemma. You know, it's really hard to live with technology. We're distracted, we're dependent. You know, the recent in Australia digital outage that many consumers and businesses faced exemplified just how dependent on so many facets of our lives, both professionally and personally, we are on technology. So it's really hard to live with, but the thought of being without it is equally as terrifying. So I often say, you know, technology has made us more connected, but as you said, more disconnected. We are now often together, but alone. And this is having a profound impact on all of us physically, psychologically, from a performance perspective. But the reality is, whether we love it or loathe it, it's not going away. Technology is here to stay. It has its tentacles in every part of our lives. And we just have to learn how to live with it in ways that are congruent with how we are designed as humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you take a neurobiological approach to that and love to talk to you about that a bit more because we are wired to our devices in a way that I think most of us kind of know but don't really want to admit to. And I think that it's very disconnecting when we're with other people, and we hear about that all the time. But I think one of the big catches is that we use technology to spend time with ourselves and feel more connected. And yet it's disconnecting us from ourselves as well as from other people.
Yeah, and this is what we're trying to, I think, reconcile, and that we're struggling with. What you just described is we are spending an inordinate amount of time. Some Australian research estimates that the average Australian adult will spend a whopping 17 years of their entire lifetime on their phones alone. That is an inordinate, that's a really sobering statistic. That is an inordinate amount of time for us to be on a screen. Now, yes, some of that could be collaborating, connecting, WhatsApp chat, sending silly memes to our friends, a family Skype call, whatever it absolutely can be connection. But I think if we took a brutal, honest look at a lot of that time, it is often predominantly leisure-based time, where, as you said, Celeste, it is us often consuming information, being very much alone, and this can have a profound impact, as we're already seeing, as you identified with the loneliness epidemic, and some other health issues as well.
And we're just consuming and consuming, which takes us away from real connecting if we're not doing that effectively online, and also from creating. I mean, whether that's baking a cake or getting your hands in the dirt to plant some vegetables or whatever feels creative and life-giving to you, everything is now default, this kind of 2D experience.
The digital default is what often many people are describing it as. And this is not to demonize technology. And it's not to say, my philosophy is it's not about doing a digital detox. It's not about digital amputation. They are redundant, outdated strategies and approaches. It's all about, well, how can I be a master of the technology and not a slave to my screen? Because I think if, again, we took a harsh look at some of our digital habits and behaviors, technology is our master. It's not our servant. We get a ping and we start salivating like Pavlov's dogs. We can't switch off. Research is telling us now 28% of knowledge workers are now working between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. on a consistent basis. We've got employers, I should say, saying people don't want to take their annual leave, or if they are, they feel compelled to still check emails and the Teams messages and the Slack messages. So are we really psychologically detaching from our work, even when we are supposed to be having a break? Huge numbers of people saying, I feel guilty for taking a break. I feel guilty for resting, because now we can always be on. And this is the conundrum that I think many organizations and individuals are really facing.
Yeah, like it's become a moral dilemma to disconnect and actually live our lives.
It has, and we're actually seeing legislation across Australia and internationally in this space. The Queensland Department of Education, the Victorian Police Force already have clauses in their enterprise bargaining agreements around the right to disconnect. And there's a lot of speculation whether legislation like this will support people feeling like they will be able to switch off, or whether it will be very prohibitive and restrictive to the more flexible, productive work arrangements that have been born out of the pandemic. So there's still a lot of conjecture. What I recommend is that organizations create their digital guardrails, and that at an individual level, we create some guardrails. What are some of our digital parameters so that we can be more intentional, more deliberate about how we will certainly use technology, but also when we'll switch it off. Because one of the reasons, and you identified before, the fact that the digital technologies that have become enmeshed in our lives have been designed to tap into our most basic psychological drivers. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with self-determination theory that says that as humans, we really only have three basic psychological drivers: connection, competence, and control. And in the digital world, that need for connection is fulfilled so easily because I can fire off an email to anyone at any time. I can get, 88 WhatsApp messages dribbling in throughout my day. I go on holidays, but there's still a barrage of Teams chats that still come through. So we have that need to connect, and it's so easy to do. This is why meetings, they've coined the term meeting bloat. And many people say it's really hard for me to hit no or decline on the meeting invitation. But as a meeting organizer, there is a phenomenon called the zero cost of inclusion. I can set up a meeting and send invitations to 20 people, and it takes me a matter of seconds. And because we are biologically wired to connect, it's so ingrained in us to hit no or decline. And so we attend the meetings that we don't want to. So it's this digital dilemma that we're all faced with. And I think with AI and other technologies on the precipice, this problem will potentially become more amplified if we don't take steps to control it.
That's right. So, I mean, it's in many ways, I think, presenteeism gone mad. We're saying that businesses are trust-based, that we can work flexibly, particularly post-COVID. We have all these different ideas about how to manage work and life, but actually we're more accessible and being more present than ever and on multiple channels simultaneously. If they can't get me on text, then they'll WhatsApp me. If they can't WhatsApp me, then they Teams me. They hardly ever pick up the phone to have an actual human conversation, which is connecting. It's all just this one-way message out.
Yes, and I love that. I coined the term digital presenteeism, and I think this always on digitally connected culture has meant that, and again, when we're no longer in the office, for many people are no longer in the office 5 days a week, from an optics perspective, you want to look like you are productive. So even though you don't have to reply to the Teams message that's coming through at 10:30 on a Monday night, we still do, because we don't want to look like the Slack one not replying. And so those digital guardrails have become very blurred. I don't know if we ever even established them through no fault of anyone's. We were thrust into remote and now hybrid work. And I don't think we've ever taken the time to say, well, how do we make this sustainable? How do we make this productive? The other thing we know is that digital distractions are having a mammoth cost on productivity and performance. Meetings, mail, and messages, the 3 M's, are so detrimental to our performance, particularly as knowledge workers. So this is a topic we just really have to get on top of because it will increase exponentially.
Absolutely. I mean, every single organisation I work with, when we're talking about culture and performance, those are the 3 M's that immediately come up, that they're suffocating people, they're suffocating performance and productivity, and they're turning us into these kind of present zombies. So we're going through just ticking off task lists and going through the process of endless meetings and never really focusing on what's going to give us real bang for our buck in terms of making change, getting to objectives, or even just genuine connection instead of this kind of light version.
And in fact, Microsoft coined a term early this year, which I love. And when I share it with the people I work with, I get a resounding yes. And it's this term digital debt. And that many people, particularly who are predominantly knowledge workers, are spending, it's estimated, from Microsoft usage data. So this is not self-reporting where there's a halo effect or, inflated results. This is actual data from Microsoft usage. And Microsoft users, who are they segregated and look just at knowledge workers, are spending around 57% of their workday now doing work about work, Teams chats, Teams calls, and emails. And then the leftover is for the deep focus work that they're supposed to be doing as a fundamental part of their job.
What they're actually getting paid for.
Absolutely. And this is, what many people are struggling with. And we're seeing a huge impact, as I said, not only on the productivity angle, but also from people's well-being. Back-to-back video calls are exhausting. Having your attention constantly hijacked by pings and dings and reminders for the next meeting that you're supposed to be attending. This is almost, I often refer to it as the digital superstorm. We are using and we have adopted some really unhealthy digital habits that are completely incongruent with how we are designed to function as humans, our neurobiology. And that's why I think, we're seeing it in terms of rates of stress and burnout. We are, in fact, global leaders in Australia at the moment in both of those domains, not a statistic we should be proud of, but I believe it's these really subtle digital habits that have crept in that are one of the contributing factors to that.
Factors. What about anxiety? Because I know not just feeling anxious, because we're starting to use a lot of psychological terminology in the workplace, like everyone has a diagnosis and they don't necessarily, but instead of just talking about feeling anxious, my understanding is there's been a significant rise in diagnosable anxiety disorders, and that one of the biggest contributing factors, again, is technology.
It is. And researchers are actually studying a phenomenon called technostress. So we're not imagining it. Our digital habits can make us feel particularly stressed and anxious. And if we go back to how we design, so we as humans have, I often say, an ancient Paleolithic brain. We have a brain that was biologically designed to go and forage, hunt, and seek information. But in a digital world where information is constantly being thrust at us, alerts, reminders, pings, and dings, the fact that they vibrate on our wrist if you wear a smartwatch, or, if it's in your pocket, the fact that your notification bubble is often red. Red is a psychological trigger for urgency and importance, or danger, alert. The fact that there's a metric declaring how many unread emails, how many unread Teams chats you've got. All of these subtle ways trick us into thinking that this is a particularly stressful situation because the unsolicited information has come to us. Our brain cannot physically or physiologically differentiate between a Teams notification and a tiger chasing us. Our brain says potential stressor or danger, I better open it, I better respond, this could be important, this could be, and so we're elevating our stress response in subtle ways. The fact that when we're looking at a screen, many of us are spending over 8 to 9 hours a day looking at a small surface area, be that a desktop, a laptop, a phone, a tablet. And when our eyes converge as humans and look at a small surface area, it biologically triggers the stress response. Because as humans, we are, if we go back to our neurobiological roots, we're designed to look at things in the distance. So it's these subtle ways that we're feeling like we're more stressed and maybe feeling perhaps those feelings of anxiety because of some of those pervasive tech habits that have sort of crept into our lives in all parts.
All parts. And you're the mother of 3 boys. I have 2 boys and my partner's daughter at home with us as well. And I look at my role modelling around technology, and just like you say in your book, none of us are the finished article, none of us are doing this perfectly. And I see the impact it has from everything to influencing their buying patterns. People can get to them in a way that used to have an ad on TV and be able to switch it off. They have their own devices now that they can be reached at any time by advertisers, by influencers, and by kids who are bullying them at school. There is no off. Home is no longer sacrosanct, sacred space. There's this constant kind of invasion. So I'm super curious to understand, this is such good work you're doing. Where did it come from personally? Like, it seems a bit of a mission for you. Was it the burnout for you that triggered it? Was it the context of wanting to create a different world for your family? What was the driving factor?
Yes, so my career had some iterations and some pivots, or pirouettes, I like to say. Sounds a little bit more graceful than what it really was. But I started out initially as an educator. So I was a teacher, and then I became an academic, looking at the impact technology was having on the developing brain, so in particular children and teens. And then I would deliver a lot of parent seminars and seminars to health professionals, but it was often adults that would come up at the end and say, I know that was for my kids, but a lot of what you were sharing was pertinent to me, but I justify my digital usage under the guise of I need it for work, or I'm just doing work. And it was an accident that I had with my middle son, who sustained a very serious facial injury when I was digitally distracted. And the irony of the situation, I'd been asked to deliver a keynote for Apple in Singapore, and the keynote was around children's digital distraction. And I came back to Sydney, was triaging my emails, should have been watching my son. I was only opening my email to send one email. I'd ambitiously scheduled a work call during his expected nap time. He was 15 months at the time. And he decided he wasn't having a nap. So I thought I'll just send this one email to cancel. It was back in the days of Skype call. I'll cancel the Skype call. And I opened my laptop and saw that awful red icon declaring, I think it was 144 unread emails. And I got sucked into the digital vortex, as so many of us do. I'm just going to send one message. I'm just going to do this. And before we know it, and I call that, it's the state of insufficiency. Because in the online world, we will never feel done. we will never feel complete. Inbox zero is an artificial state. It's a temporary moment in time. There's always another message, another episode. This is why we engage in revenge bedtime procrastination at night, watching just one more Netflix episode. And so it was my own moment where I got distracted. My son fell off the lounge that he was climbing and had to be rushed to hospital, having sustained a really serious facial injury because I, as an adult, was distracted. So it's certainly impacting how we parent. It's impacting our children and their mental health and well-being. Often not in the direct causal way that we think. I think for many years we've wagged the finger and said, it's social media and gaming that is responsible for young people's mental health crisis that we're seeing. The research actually doesn't corroborate that in a causational perspective. It is what technology is displacing that's having an impact on young people's mental health. And the three big levers: connection, sleep, physical movement. When we have human connection, study compared text-based interaction. So a lot of young people say, but I'm chatting to my friends, I'm sending DMs, I'm sending them a snap, we're connecting. Well, a study was done that examined text-based communications as compared to in-person communications. When humans have text-based communications, our brain makes cortisol, the stress hormone. Is it the narrow gaze? Is it that we also know when we look at a small surface area, we don't sigh anywhere near as much? And as humans, we should be sighing while we're awake every 5 minutes to regulate our stress response. We're not quite sure what the mechanism was, but we do know the brain produces cortisol. They compared it to in-person, face-to-face human connection, what I call real FaceTime. When you're in a physical proximity with a human, what our brain produces then is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the social bonding, it's the love hormone, it's the connection hormone. We do not replicate that online. We cannot replicate that yet. Will holograms, will new virtual meeting environments produce that? We're yet to decide. But you can't argue with that. And our young people's tech habits are displacing connection, sleep, and physical movement. And that's why I think we're seeing that decline in young people's mental health.
Agreed. And I think some of the work by Cheryl Turkle talking about, she lists some of the research around 18 to 25-year-olds, and that you would know better than me the actual statistic, but that the level of recognisable empathy in that age group is down 40%. I was going to say to our generation, but I won't cast any aspersions on your age with me, but it's down 40%. And I definitely see that. And I don't think that this group of people are any less human or any less wanting to connect. They don't have the skill because they've defaulted to a digital interface where they're not learning about eye contact, about how to regulate your own emotions, your nervous system, interacting with another human biologically as much as, emotionally with words.
Yes, and an interesting study, I can't remember if this was included in one of Cheryl Turkle's books, but they had a group of students and they sent them off to a 5-day camp. It was an American study, so it was a summer camp. And in this particular study, they measured the students' facial recognition skills before the camp and then after a 5-day camp where they didn't have access to phones and technology. Overwhelmingly, at the end of the study, the students' capacity to recognise subtle nuances in body language, facial expressions changed dramatically by just having a 5-day period where they weren't as digitally dependent. So I think this illuminates and we're hearing it. I hear a lot of people saying anecdotally they interact with young people often in a shop, ordering a coffee or, at the supermarket, and that absence of communication skills, the absence of eye contact, the truncated sentences. And I know sometimes that can just be teenagers, and sometimes we can just catch, we might have the same experience with an adult who's having a rotten day, but we're hearing this theme being reiterated. And I'm hearing from a lot of companies who are saying our new graduates, won't, as you said before, are reluctant to take a phone call. They are, firing off messages around the clock. We get very truncated messages. We have emojis being used. So there's a whole lot of different ways in which people are using technology. And I think it's being amplified in this digital context we're all now operating in.
Yeah. I mean, I have one 13-year-old and he loves technology. I mean, they all do. but he also loves humans. He's one of those very socially wired people. And he went out with some friends recently. They were on their bikes, and he's the only child out of 170 in his year that doesn't have a mobile phone. He's got a watch so he can contact us. And it's a really hard line to hold because it's a fine line between, reducing something that's not good for them and them being socially part of what's going on. And he was saying that they went out and rode their bikes and they stopped somewhere and everyone was on their phones and he was trying to talk to them and they didn't want to talk. And in the end, he got bored and came home, which is quite concerning.
And that's one of the things when I do speak to when I did speak to parents, I talk to parents about how do we help kids and teens, screen ages I call them, how do we help them to thrive in the digital world? And I think a lot of it can apply to us. And I think it's the 3 Bs. We have to create boundaries, and we have to have boundaries beyond how much time. How much time is a redundant concept. I think it's more about what are the boundaries around what they can use, when they can use it, where they'll use it, whom they can use it with, how will they use it. The second B is around their basic needs. We have to make sure that their basic needs aren't being eroded by technology, in particular those 3 we spoke about earlier, human connection, sleep and movement. And the third B is around boredom. We are not designed as humans to be plugged in and processing information all of the time. I often ask when I deliver a keynote, where do your best ideas, what are you doing when your best ideas germinate? And most people call out shower. When I'm going for a drive, when I'm going for a walk, I have never, in the thousands of people I've spoken to, ever had anyone say in my inbox, in an Excel spreadsheet. Like it just, no. It's the when we enter, and neuroscientists call it the default mode network. It's just a fancy word for daydreaming. But today we fill every bit of white space, every bit of void in our days with our screens, and our kids are emulating this. We order the coffee, we pull out our phone. People pull up at a red traffic light, they pull out their phone. You get in a lift, you pull out your phone. And so we're not being particularly good digital role models as adults, and yet we wag the finger and turn around and say how young people are addicted and they're distracted and they can't put it down. Are we really that surprised? I think it's also amplified because when children transition from sort of childhood into adolescence, a normal rite of passage is that they want to gravitate more towards their peer group. And so, you want to naturally spend less time with your parents and family unit. You want to become more independent and you want to gravitate to your peer group. Now, when all of your peer group are on social media, have their own phone, are gaming at all hours, it can become very socially ostracizing if you're the anomaly. And then those behaviors get reiterated and fueled because they start imitating the behaviors that their peers are adopting. So it can become really cumbersome for parents and a tricky topic to manage.
Yeah, and because all of us are using this as our default connection and many other things as well, we get dopamine, little dopamine hits every time we interact on these, platforms. And so we're kind of like dopamine addicts, and we're not able to sit with boredom, but also uncomfortable feelings. The first thing we do with just a little bit of anxiety is we pick up the phone, we get a little hit of dopamine. There's no sense of emotional management and the whole spectrum of human emotions. We're just kind of numbing them with this constant little dopamine hit,
if not exacerbating them. So as humans, because we have a negativity bias, we will tend to click on the link to the story with a really negative headline. We tend to hover, and when we hover over a post on social media, we are telling the algorithm, serve me up more of this content. So we fuel this. And again, this is why I think we're seeing stress and anxiety at heightened states, because a lot of people will say to me, but checking social media is relaxing. Well, have you really paused to think? Does your HRV data, if you track it, tell you the same thing? Or is it adding to your stress and anxiety? Years ago, we would have only ever read about tragic events happening in the world, be that a natural disaster, be that wars. Yes, over time, we started to see news footage, as in video footage, but that was usually at one time in the day if we chose to watch it. Think about our days today, and even our young people's days today, they are confronting real-time, raw footage of terrible natural disasters, of human suffering, of wars. And our brain has not evolved to cope with that and filter it out. And so I think it's the culmination of all these, very subtle ways our neurobiology is being affected, our narrow gaze, we're not sighing enough, like looking at a small surface area, we're not breathing the way we used to, coupled with what it is that we're consuming, coupled also the third dimension is the sheer volume. It's estimated the average adult consumes a whopping 74 gigabytes worth of information professionally and personally per day.
When we wonder why we feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, I often say to people, do you feel like you are the emoji of the head exploding? And I get people nodding emphatically. And again, our brain, the hippocampus, the part of our brain that's like our memory center or the hard drive, our hippocampus has not got any larger to accommodate that increase in volume. So it's like, when your computer gets to its storage limit and no files will save, you get the spinning wheel of death and you what's going on? And we get frustrated. We're doing that to our brain every day. We're just processing so much. And so again, I totally agree. We placate our kids even from a young age. Kids throw a tantrum and we soothe them with a screen. As teenagers, we can see, I'm frustrated, I'm agitated, whatever the big emotion is, I self-medicate with a little bit of screen use. And so I totally agree. We're bypassing some of the emotional regulation that we used to have to develop. And I think our tech habits are, again, exacerbating how we're feeling as well.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff, the emotional regulation, the understanding who I authentically am, being able to have genuine, deep connections with other people, be able to have genuine debate and get out of my myopic perspective, which social media just fuels more and more. That's how we evolve. And you start to wonder, how much are we individually, collectively evolving, and how much are we devolving, or at least being stuck, because those things that used to help us grow, learn, develop, they're not there in the same way. We're not accessing them in the same way.
Yes, I often remind people that we have something called mirror neurons. So as humans, one of the ways that we learn language and we learn motor skills is through imitation. This is why if you have children, I don't know if it's the same for you, Celeste, but in my house, my sons have inherited all of my husband's worst characteristics and traits, none of mine. Yes, but we are designed as humans to copy, emulate, imitate. And so if we've got young people consuming racial, inappropriate, sexualized content, then they are primed to imitate and copy that. So again, we're not developing that sense of self. And again, if that's coupled with the fact that they just don't have the opportunity to be bored, to be idle with their thoughts, to say, this is what excites me, interests me, terrifies me, not what the recommendation algorithm is serving up to me.
And telling me.
Yes. And again, platforms have become so popular because they know with precise accuracy, based on a user's viewing history, exactly what bespoke content to serve up to them to keep them on the platform for longer and longer. And so we often, again, we say, this is just for young people. It's happening to us. What you consume on social media and news sites and any online experience is really dictated by your history, by what's in your DMs. There's a complex formula that determines what we're being served up. So I just think we need to be more mindful
of what we do and how we do it. And for you personally, obviously your book's been so well received, and I'm sure businesses are eating it up to understand the ideas, but also the practical changes that you recommend. What's the big picture for you? If I said to you in 5 years, let's do this again, what would you want to have achieved?
I would love for people to take back control of their technology. I would love for people to be using it because I think it's a great tool. There are things that we couldn't have even fathomed 5 years ago that we can now do. I would have dreaded if we had gone through a pandemic when we didn't have access to the digital communicative technologies that we had that enabled us to just survive. But I really want people to certainly use technology, but do so in a way that's congruent with our human operating system. And that is how we are designed as humans. And that's when I think we'll hit the sweet spot. There is some research called the productivity paradox, and the very technologies that were designed to make us more efficient and effective, emails, communication tools, have had the opposite effect. And so I think we'll hit that sweet juncture, that spot where we can certainly leverage the opportunities. And this is why I'm excited, because we're on the precipice of AI being enveloped or introduced into workplaces. If we can put some parameters in place and use the technology in a way that works for us, we will see that productivity paradox hopefully reversed. And in doing so, look after our performance and well-being as humans as well.
And, from my perspective, very aligned, that people will be able to sit with their uncomfortable feelings, really think about who they authentically are, not who they're being told to be by the things that are projected at them, and that they can really rediscover a sense of themselves and of meaning, purpose, fulfillment, but especially that those relationships that are so fundamental to our growth and our wellness and our happiness, that they become deep and mutual, not the surface kind of connections that so many of us have defaulted to. So I think there's so much positive change that can come out of what feels like I'll just regulate something a bit more. Actually, it can fundamentally change the way that we feel and live our lives.
I agree. And I often say technology, if we don't control it, if we don't put some guardrails up, has the potential to rob us of our two most important human resources, our time and our attention. And they are resources that we never get back, we can never replace. And in my book, I share a serendipitous meeting I had with a palliative care nurse who's worked in the industry for a whopping 30 years, which I just find staggering. And when I asked her, is she seeing the same regrets in people dying as those that were documented in Bronnie Ware's book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying? She said yes. But she also said to me, and she didn't know what I did for work, I hadn't told her anything about myself. She leaned in and she said, but Christy, there's a sixth regret creeping in. And I said, what's that? And she said, people are wishing they'd spent less time on their devices.
When I read that in your book, I had the same reaction that you're having right now. It's
that statistic I shared earlier, 17 years on our phones at this point in time. Now, this estimate is before AI, before the metaverse, before more immersive technologies are on our doorstep. That could be, a mammoth amount of time when we add those in, add in our laptop and desktop time. And again, it's not demonizing it. Some of that time is certainly productive. It's helpful. We are often connecting in rich ways. But we also need to examine what's at what cost, what are we missing out on? And if it is that human connection, I share a story as well. Often, when your child is at swimming lessons and they nail the tumble turn and they come up, their goggles are filled with water, the cap's off their head, and they look at you to give you the toothless wink and give you the thumbs up. But have you missed that micro moment of connection because you're triaging your inbox or ordering the groceries or organizing the play date? That's that whole idea that we can now be together but alone, and we can be connected but disconnected. And so we just have to take back control. And then I think we can flourish and certainly leverage the digital technologies that are on our doorstep as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We'll put the link to your book in the show notes, and I really encourage anyone who's interested in examining their relationship with technology and the disconnection it can bring, not demonizing technology, but much more understanding how you can be in charge of it instead of it being in charge of you, then you definitely need to read Dr. Christie's book and get those practical, tangible, small habit changes to make a really big difference to how we're living.
Thank you. That's very generous of sharing that. I appreciate those kind words. I really do believe small incremental changes will yield huge results for us. So it's not about a digital detox or a radical tech overhaul. And no, I don't suggest you give up social media or cancel your Netflix subscription. It's all about pragmatic, realistic things we can do to better manage our tech.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for your time today.
Pleasure.
Talking about the fact that we are biologically wired for connection with other people, it's the number one thing that makes us thrive in life. And whilst I think you can connect digitally, and there's actually a lot of great aspects to technology to keep us connected with the world and with other people, I think what we're using it now for is a default, surface level, shallow connection with the world and with each other. And I think what Dr. Christie is really getting to here is not that we want to demonize technology and say that we just need to detox completely and not have any of it in our lives, but actually we need to get in control of it. You know, when we work with people, we talk about being the boss of our brain, which means being really aware of the thoughts we're having, the feelings that we're having, and choosing the stories about the world that we live in and ourselves so that we can become more of the people that we authentically are and also that we want to be. And the thing about particularly social media is it's just algorithmed to keep feeding us more and more of the same stuff that we already think. And it's dumbing us down, frankly, because it's making us want to click on the most negative clickbait, as Dr. Christie talks about. And we're just filling our minds and our conversations with constant negative thoughts about the world and other people, instead of using it for good. And we talk in our business about technology for good, where we can genuinely connect with people. For example, one of my best mates, Eileen, in London, who I can't physically see anymore, but if I FaceTime her, she can be in her slippers in her house and I can be drinking a glass of wine in mine, and we can walk around and talk to each other's families and see what the latest renovation is that she's done. She does a lot of renovating. And it just means that we are in each other's lives in a way that 15, 20 years ago, we would have been really separated forever other than letters. So I think we need to stop thinking about technology as being all bad and start to understand how we can genuinely harness it. And it starts with really small habits. So looking at how much time do you really spend on screens? And when you start to realize that it's going to net out over the next 10 years to be years and years of your life spent potentially just doom scrolling, not genuinely connecting, not creating anything, not evolving, not learning, all the things that everyone in this community is here to do. It's literally eating our time and our attention and dumbing us down so that we cannot be what we want to be, and we can't make the world into what we want the world to be either. It's such an interesting point that we are in these back-to-back meetings, getting messages all the time and emails all the time. And there's nowhere that we seem to be able to escape in a professional, let alone a personal sense now. I work with so many big businesses, and literally the number one thing every single person complains about is the back-to-back meeting culture and the number of emails and ways that people can message each other so that they feel like they have to be constantly present and never switch off. And you and I both know that that means us too. And what we need to do is just like grab back agency and put in some boundaries where we say, this is enough. You can get me this way, but not that way. And I'm not going to do hour-long meetings. I'm going to make every meeting 45 minutes, or if it's a 30-minute meeting, make it a 25-minute meeting so that I have some gaps between this constant presenteeism we're all expected to now participate in. We know that research says that for the first 15 minutes of the second meeting, you're actually still in the first meeting. It's called attention residue. So you're sitting there looking like you're participating in meeting number 2 for the day, but actually you're sitting there thinking about what that person said, or I forgot to say that, or I've got to follow this up, or why did they say that? And you're analysing what's just happened and not actually present for the first 15 minutes of the next meeting. And that just goes on and on exponentially through the day. Then we rush back to our desks and answer emails in a perfunctory way that's just creating more noise for everyone. So I think thinking about some basics that Dr. Christie talks about in her books, but even just at a high level, get all your notifications off because it is just a constant distraction and you cannot focus when you are being dinged and pinged, as she said. Change the way that you're attending meetings so that you're not in hour-long back-to-back meetings all day. Batch your emails so that you do them in chunks of time and not first thing in the morning, because it's a total waste of your brain power and ability to focus. And really double down on picking up the phone or walking over to a human rather than creating noise for them by sending them yet another email. I think on the idea of children, teenagers and tech, that as Dr. Chrissy refers to, we kind of like wag our fingers at the kids and tell them off because tech's so bad. And I think that that's a really bad strategy, particularly with teenagers, because technology gives them a window into the world that's way outside of what we give them in our homes. It gives them a level of independence and agency so that they can self-direct to find things that they're interested in, create their identity and connect with people. What we're not doing, though, is role modelling what good looks like. We've become addicted to our technology, and they're doing exactly the same thing. They're watching us walk around with our phones in our hands from one room to the other, including into the toilet, because we can't even be in the toilet alone without our phones. And they're seeing that our phones in many ways seem more important than them. And I'm super conscious of this because, my kids are so exhausted hearing about connection and eye contact and empathy and all the things, because we tend to do it, including me, in fits and starts. I'll do that over the dinner table, but then I might walk away from the dinner table and pick up my phone just like you. And I look at my screen time and I think, I spend a lot of time on screens, and I tell myself it's for work, and it is, but it's also because I'm constantly researching connection and psychology. And again, what I'm doing is just being alone in my own head. I'm not really present with them, and I'm not showing them that that's the real stuff of life. It's not the stuff we're doing on our devices. It's what we're doing with each other. So I think we have to kind of get alongside our kids. I'm very bad at video games. I don't like them, but I have a profile on every one of the games my kids play so that they can show me their characters and what the games do and how it works for them. And I can at least talk like I understand these alternate worlds they're literally living in and expressing themselves in, and not be against them in it, but with them in it. Now, I don't profess to be perfect on this because actually it bores me witless, but I make myself do it in little bits of time so that it doesn't become a me versus them or an us versus technology thing. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I would love to hear what you think. And here's a perfect example of using technology and social media for good instead of for evil. I would love you to come join me on the socials, Insta, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever your jam is, because I have been learning myself how good those platforms can be for creating actual human connection. My own truth around social media is that I've always really struggled with it because it seems surface and shallow. But I have been proven wrong recently. All the podcast guests that we have had on the show so far are people that I have connected with on social media and now are developing an inhuman relationship with. So I think if we can think about genuine human connection, having real conversations instead of it just being a platform to kind of like and consume, it really changes the way that we use it for good. And I would love to genuinely connect and chat with you. Thank you for joining us on the Reconnection Revolution. We hope today's episode has ignited a spark within you, reminding you of the power of genuine connection. As we wrap up, remember that your support means the world to us. To stay connected with our vibrant community and never miss an episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you've found value in our conversations and stories, we would love to hear from you. Please leave us a review and let us know what you loved, what you hated, what you want more of, so that we can empower and inspire more people just like you. Until next time, keep curious, keep questing, keep connecting, and remember, we really are all in this together.